This is Your Daily Detroit, recorded on Tuesday, January 29th. I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson, podcasting from the shipping container studios of Podcast Detroit in a beautiful but very cold Midtown. And Jer, today's show is a special kind of milestone for us, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. It snuck up on us really quick, but this is indeed episode 200 for Daily Detroit.
That's pretty great. Should we celebrate somehow?
Well, we are in a shipping container development with a bar downstairs, so that sounds appropriate, but we won't rest on our laurels too much. We've got a show to do.
Indeed. Let's get to it. Daily Detroit is brought to you in part by Bamboo Detroit. With an inclusive community, flexible modern offices, classes, and networking events, Bamboo Detroit helps entrepreneurs and innovative companies launch, land, or expand in Detroit. Become one of their more than 400 members today at bamboodetroit.com.
It's going to be very cold the next few days. The National Weather Service says that we're in for wind chills that could exceed 40 degrees below zero as part of a polar vortex. And there's a wind chill warning in effect from 6 p.m. Tuesday until 11 a.m. on Thursday.
People all over Detroit and Michigan are getting ready for this blast of cold air that we would normally describe as being Arctic. But what we're about to get will likely be colder than some Arctic cities.
The vortex is expected to be at its coldest on Wednesday, but it'll still be quite cold on Thursday. As of this recording, it's believed it'll start to warm up a little on Friday. But here's the kicker. There's a big warm-up happening right after this deep freeze, with a forecast of 43 degrees and rainy for Sunday. That's going to wreak havoc on roads and underground systems around the region.
So let's break down some of the knock-on effects of this icy blast, shall we? Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer declared a state of emergency on Monday night. Wayne State University is closing as we record this show and will be closed all day on Wednesday, the 29th.
Michigan State University up in Lansing is canceling classes for just the 7th time in its history, starting at 8 a.m. Wednesday.
Many community colleges will be closed. So will many K-12 public school districts, including my own kids.
Not to mention, the Detroit Zoo is closing as well. You got to keep those capybaras safe and warm.
What's a capybara?
Is my favorite animal. They're like the chillest animal. They live in South America, and they live in like water and rainforests. You want to look for capybaras hanging out with fruit on YouTube.
Okay. Warming centers are opening up across the region, with 14 in Macomb County and 31 in Wayne County, according to DTE Energy. We'll have a link to that listing in the show notes.
The intense freeze-thaw swing isn't good news for those potholes springing up all over I-75, as we reported on an episode last week. Another bit of infrastructure at risk is underground water and sewer mains. Earlier today, I chatted with the head of the Detroit Water and Sewage Department, Gary Brown, about their plans. So we have a lot of inclement weather coming in. It does a number on infrastructure, roads, pipes, things like that. What is your plan to deal with that?
Well, right now, the plan is to move as much staff that would normally be working on the sewer portion of the system or on meters or on maintenance, move them over to the water main side of the house so that we can have all of our contractors, subcontractors, all of our employees focused on the number of water main breaks that we expect over the next week or so.
I understand there's a greater plan within the city of Detroit itself to spend quite a bit of money within the city on pipes and infrastructure and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we're in the second year of a 5-year capital improvement plan where the city of Detroit is spending $500 million to upgrade the system. And so we're going to be spending more than $100 million a year. And you'll start to see that work in April, the beginning of the construction season, when we start replacing water mains and relining sewer lines. Most importantly, though, we're putting Detroiters to work. There's nothing that Detroit needs more to drive people out of poverty than jobs. And so while we're rebuilding the infrastructure, we're using Detroiters' rate dollars to do it. They should benefit from that. And we're creating jobs for Detroiters to help drag them out of the poverty situations that they're in and to help rebuild our system.
How can people contribute, get involved? Because if they see standing water, if they see things like that, what do they need to do?
Well, you use common sense. The first thing you do is you call 313-267-8000 And if you don't want to go through the menu, push 5. That'll get you directly into our dispatcher, and we'll get someone out there to identify what the problem is. Secondly, don't drive through it. I mean, we have a number of cars that are driving way faster than the weather will allow. They hit a fire hydrant. They knock that particular water main that's servicing that fire hydrant out of service. They put a restaurant, a deli, a Coney Island out of business. People don't get to go to work. The businesses lose money. And it was all unnecessary because people are driving too fast for the conditions. In their home, make sure you keep the temperature high enough to at least stop pipes that may be located on the outer walls of the house from freezing. Because if they freeze and break, you got to call us. We got to come out, shut your water off so you can get a licensed plumber. It could be very expensive. So those are the things that Detroiters can do to help over the next week or so eliminate some of the unnecessary water main breaks.
One thing to note before we move on, if you need help in this cold, call 211 for guidance to programs and assistance.
Michigan officials and residents looking for help from the federal government in limiting PFAS contamination from public drinking water supplies may be out of luck. Politico reported on Monday that the Environmental Protection Agency won't set drinking water limits for the per- and polyfluorinated chemicals PFOA and PFOS, leaving them unregulated under the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. PFAS is a group of chemicals that have been used in everything from Teflon to Scotchgard and aircraft firefighting foam. They've been linked to cancer, developmental delays, and endocrine disruption. The chemicals have turned up in drinking water supplies across the state and nation, with more than 2 million Michigan residents having at least trace levels of PFAS in their drinking water. Many in Michigan want the state to adopt stricter standards than the unenforceable federal health advisory levels. But that may be complicated by a new law passed during last year's lame duck session. It prevents Michigan from enacting environmental protections that are stricter than federal standards.
In related news, MLive reports Tuesday that the U.S. Air Force is telling the state of Michigan it does not have to comply with regulations limiting PFAS contamination at a former air base near Oscoda. Past use of firefighting foam at the base has polluted drinking water and is causing toxic foam to foul local beaches. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality wants the Air Force to expand a program pumping contaminated groundwater from underneath the base into a filtration system. But the Air Force claims the federal government hasn't waived sovereign immunity to the state regulations. We'll put a link to this very interesting story in the show notes.
The woman who headed up General Motors' urban mobility activities and the mobility brand Maven has left the company. Reports say Julia Stein is working on a mutual separation agreement with GM. Stein came to GM in 2012 as Vice President of Corporate Development and Global Mergers and Acquisitions. She spent the last 3 years plus as VP of Urban Mobility and Maven. There was no word on why she's leaving, but it's thought not to be related to GM's efforts to trim its salaried workforce by 15%. Stein helped launch Maven 3 years ago and has grown the car-sharing service to 24 cities in the United States, Canada, and Australia, including Detroit and Ann Arbor. The program also offers a university campus program and Maven Gig, which is a service for ride-hailing and delivery drivers. Maven last year launched a peer-to-peer sharing service that allows vehicle owners to list their vehicles when they're not using them, similar to Airbnb. GM reportedly plans to fill her position with an internal candidate.
2 Detroit Medical Center hospitals could lose federal funding starting this spring after they failed 2 inspections. The Detroit News reports that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has notified Harper Hospital and Detroit Receiving Hospital that they don't meet federal requirements to participate in Medicare. That's the federal health insurance program for seniors. The 2 hospitals face projected termination dates of April 15th. Inspectors found flying insects in an intensive care unit, lapses in sterile processing of surgical instruments, and other problems monitoring infections. Any loss of Medicare funding would also bar them from participating in Medicaid, the federal health insurance program for low-income residents. Most patients served by the DMC are funded by Medicare or Medicaid. We'll have a link on dailydetroit.com. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Milo Digital. Milo Digital is a full-service digital marketing agency that engineers quality results through data and innovative strategies. Learn more at milodetroit.com.
Jack White's Third Man Records is making another investment in Detroit. Third Man Mastering, an analog and digital mastering studio, has opened in the Cass Corridor, right next door to their vinyl pressing plant. Third Man says the studio has both vintage and state-of-the-art recording equipment. Mastering is the final process in producing an album that makes the record sound as good to everyone else as it does in your head. Think of it as a final edit of your writing for polish. The company says that the in-house engineers, Bill Skibby and Warren DeFever, have more than 1,000 albums under their belt. They include Grammy winners and artists including Franz Ferdinand, Proto-Martyr, Iggy and the Stooges, Yoko Ono, The Gories, and many others. One of our listeners took issue with our report last week about a study looking at the effects of Proposal A on public education funding in Michigan. Listener Anne, she asked that we not use her full name, emailed us to say that, quote, "Your explanation of why Proposal A hurt Michigan schools focused on special education costs was just nowhere close." She adds, "Special education costs are an issue throughout the country, but Proposal A problems are structural." Anne, who we also thank dearly for being a Daily Detroit member, also points out that Proposal A switched funding to a per-pupil basis. That change does not account for infrastructure costs, and it makes education funding fluctuate with enrollment and economic cycles. She believes we may have overstated the role Prop A plays in underfunding special education needs. To be clear, though, we were paraphrasing the findings of the Michigan State University researchers who authored the report, not offering our own views. Anne says she was so worried about Prop A's negative effects on public education in Michigan that she enrolled her children in private schools when she moved back to the state. She calls Proposal A, quote, "an after-tax tax on professionals considering a move to our state for those who can swing it."
You know, Sven, we love hearing from our listeners.
Indeed.
If you've got something you'd like to point out or question, or if you even have a possible story tip, we do run those down. Email us at dailydetroit@gmail.com or just hit us up on social media. We're on the Twitters and the Facebooks and the Instagrams.
Well, that'll do it for your Daily Detroit. I'm Sven Gustafson. Thanks so much for listening. And please, bundle up and stay warm out there. For the love of all things, Jer, get a hat so we don't have to launch like a crowdfunding drive to buy you one.
Will do. Well, I'm the hatless Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.